Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a laser-focused, quick-fire interview on food and the economy with international experts, where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakar, Chairman, Bharat Krishik Samaj, of Farmers Forum India. Today, we are delighted to welcome Mr. Wai Chan, the Managing Director of the Consumer Goods Forum, with a rich experience across businesses. The Consumer Goods Forum is the only organization that brings consumer goods retailers and manufacturers together globally. Thank you, Mr. Chan, for joining us today.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Ajay. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you, sir. We were both involved in our ways with the UN Food Systems Summit. One of the contentious points around it was not enough emphasis was given on human rights. It could have been borrowed from the Consumer Forum, where it came out with the Human Rights Coalition, working to end forced labor. How has that progressed?
Yeah, thank you very much for asking. Maybe it's worthwhile just stepping back for a second, just to let people and maybe the viewers understand what we try to do. So we try to, as you described, get manufacturers and retailers to work together on complicated issues. Human rights would be one of them. We obviously cannot tackle the full spectrum of human rights immediately, but we can tackle particular parts to it. So we really tackle the forced labor component. And so what we do is we form coalitions. So in this coalition, I think there's around 20 members of the coalition now. So some of the pretty much some of the largest companies in the world are part of this coalition. So this coalition has a very clear objective, which is try to find ways to advance our forced labor resolution and think about the priority industry principles as it relates to forced labor. And so we get this coalition to work together, and this coalition tries to make a difference as it relates to forced labor. And so the way that we're doing it is to, number one, try to ensure that there are strong and robust due diligence systems in our own operations. Because the first thing that one should do, if you're a company, is to make sure that there is no forced labor within your own operations. And so that's what we do. So we have a very clear human rights due diligence system, and that system is now being rolled out within the companies themselves. And so that's kind of stage one, design the system. Stage two would then be to implement that system. So in terms of the question, the answer to your question, where are we on this particular piece? We're actually in the implementation stage. So that's kind of like one major bucket of activities that we conduct as it relates to human rights. So make sure that the operations that you have, and they could be wide ranging, because obviously it's actually a very complicated topic. So if you're a big company like Walmart, you have sourcing operations all around the world. If you're a big company like Unilever, you also have sourcing operations all around the world. So the question then becomes, how do you ensure that there's no forced labor in there? And so you have to be very clear that you have to have the systems in place. So that's one thing that we're doing. So it's in the implementation stage. We're not rolled out everywhere yet, but hopefully as it gets rolled out more and more, the impact will be greater. So that's one particular aspect of what we're doing. Another aspect of what we're doing as it relates to human rights is addressing a particular commodity. So we're addressing palm oil. And so what we're trying to do in palm oil, obviously palm oil is one of the biggest commodities in the world, and there might be forced labor, or there probably is forced labor within palm oil. And so what we're trying to do here is to ensure that we collaborate with suppliers in palm oil supply chains to develop that human rights due diligence system that we have, so that they implement it as well, from the refinery all the way to the plantation. So think about a company, it could be any manufacturer, and that buys palm oil. It would now be working together with its suppliers to ensure that they have a due diligence system in place as it relates to human rights, so that then they can implement it within their own companies to ensure that, at least for the companies that we deal with and for the supply chain as it relates to palm oil, that we're actually reducing the forced labor. So think of it as putting in place due diligence systems either in your own operations or in your suppliers' operations to make sure that we try to eliminate some of this. And also finally, we do try to work with governments and at least start to advocate having responsible recruitment markets. So we basically, engage with relevant stakeholders around the world just to raise the profile of this and see whether there's a way that we can cooperate with them to have responsible commitment. So the answer to your question is, we only started on coalitions a couple of years ago. We are now in the implementation phase, and so hopefully some of it will come to fruition very, very soon, and hopefully the impact will come through as well. So that's kind of what we're doing, Ajay.
Thank you for that. You touched on the topic of palm oil. So there are other issues like deforestation, palm oil cultivation, and other environmental issues that need to be addressed, and they're not easy to address. They do not have any quick solutions. But there are some bad apples which bring a bad name to the whole industry. How does the forum
Yeah, I mean,
react
it's
and
probably
deal
worth
with
noting that
reported
we're not
abuses
a
by
policeman,
its members?
as it were, right? So that's a first thing. We're not policemen, but however, we do work within a coalition context. So as you join the Consumer Goods Forum, if you join as a coalition member, which is the most important thing, because that's where we're trying to make a difference. You can join as a normal member, and that, what does that entitle you to? It entitles you to learning about what we do, but also entitles you to go to the summit that we have every single year. It's a big conference that we have in June, right? So that's what a basic membership provides you. However, if you want to make a difference to the world in which you're living in, then you join one of the coalitions. Now, as you join a coalition, and we have 8, and the human rights one was one of them that we just described. If you want to join that coalition, you have to sign up to a charter. And the charter essentially says that you've got to abide by certain types of rules. And those rules are less about you being a good actor or a bad actor, but more about you trying to live up to the direction of what we're trying to push. So in human rights, it will be to implement the due diligence systems in your own operations and in other people's, in the suppliers' operations. So it's more about that. So we don't necessarily, we're not the policeman, but if you do join a coalition, there are coalition systems in place whereby we expect you to live up to the charter within that coalition, and please, any of your members can go to our website and check out the actual charters. And so in that charter is essentially, we abide by certain principles and we go forward in a certain direction, and you've got to be participating in the coalition, etc., etc., etc. So there's a whole series of things about what you commit to do and also how involved you are. And if you don't live up to those, then we have a system in place whereby we might ask you to leave the coalition. So we don't, we're not a policeman. So if all of a sudden something happens in a country where one of our members has, and it's related to that, we don't police them and say, look, you've been bad actor in that particular circumstance. We just make sure that they abide by the principles that we have. And in our mind, it's actually more important, and we try to adopt a broad church point of view, because if we only had the best companies in the coalition, then they're already behaving in the right way, and they're already doing all the right things, because they, by definition, they're the best companies in that particular issue. What we try to do is get a broader church where some companies are less sophisticated in how they handle human rights, for example. And so, you think of it as a spectrum. So within that spectrum of the best practice players and some who are a bit less best practice, and they learn from the best practice guys, and then hopefully, by doing that, you actually move the industry a little bit forward, rather than just having the best practice people all by themselves. Then how much do they progress? Well, maybe they'll progress by themselves, but they don't pull the other companies along with them. And so that's our philosophy, to try to get a spectrum, a broad church, and try to move the whole industry, at least when it comes to our members, forward in some way. So that's how we do it. We're not policemen. If someone's done something bad, we don't police them necessarily.
It's nice because members learn from each other, and as they move forward and change happens. It's nice because members learn from each other, and as they move forward and change happens. At the UN Food System Summit, the action track 2 focused on sustainable and healthy consumption patterns. What are the learnings and commitments of the members of the Consumers Forum towards curbing unsustainable consumption patterns? Your views?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. We have a coalition as it relates to collaboration for healthy lives. We call it Collaboration for Healthy Lives. And essentially what that means is getting manufacturers and retailers together to help nudge consumers to consume more nutritious food for them. And so that might mean moving them to a slightly different type of product portfolio that will enable them to get more nutrition. And so, and it's still in the experimental stage. So we have pilots, I think, in about 14 different countries around the world. So it's quite broad, where the retailers and the manufacturers work together to in-store or online to nudge people to have more nutritious behavior. and that has yielded some benefit in some countries whereas you know, so for example, we have pilots running in Turkey, in France, in the UK, in the US, in bits of Latin America, and also in China as well, and plus Japan. There's probably some countries I've forgotten, but there's quite a broad spectrum. And so that focuses on nudging people to more nutritious behavior. Now, as we all know, nutrition is one component, but also more and more people are asking for sustainable nutrition. So what does that mean? That means consuming things that are good for you, but also good for the planet, right? And so are we working on the sustainable part of it? We are, but have we done much at the moment? No, because we've just decided to add that to the overall scope of the coalition. So initially it was about healthy consumption, but now we're trying to move a little bit into sustainable consumption. But I guess the first thing that you need to do when you think about sustainable consumption is, how do you define whether a plate is sustainable or not? So you need to define that first. And so that's the thing that we're looking at now before we, you know, march head on into this. Because on health, we have nutritional labeling all around the world. So therefore we have a rough sense as to what's healthy for you, right? But when it comes to sustainability, whether a plate that you eat today compared to a plate that you might eat tomorrow, what's more sustainable, then the definitions are much less secure and robust. And so we are in the process of trying to come up with a holistic list of what is defined as sustainable, and then based on that we will run experiments and pilots, and then where pilots work, we will expand them and accelerate them. So that's kind of what we're doing on the action track 2.
There is much pessimism over the slow progress on industry goals around issues like plastic waste. What are the changes taking place, and does it require more regulation, or is it just voluntarism the way forward for consumer businesses to deliver to the world's citizens' expectation?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. You're going to need volunteerism and also regulation. Now, as it relates to volunteerism, don't forget there are certain people that will influence whether a company does things. Number one, whether they believe it's the right thing to do because they just have a noble purpose, for example, and also secondly, whether the investors are nudging them to do things in a certain way. And so therefore you get ESG investors these days as well, right? And also activist investors who might be looking at that particular component of what you're doing. And also you have consumers as well. If consumers want you to do a certain thing, you're not doing it, then they're going to vote with their feet, right? And they're going to go and buy something else from somebody else. And if you're not doing it, so those are the, I would say, the more voluntary things. But then, but they're not really voluntary. They're being nudged by either investors or shareholders and consumers, and maybe slightly voluntary by the CEO and the team. And then you have the regulations, which is the external, government thing. So I think you need both. On plastic waste, there's a lot that can be done, and so what we're doing as a consumer goods forum is we're tackling it from 3 particular angles, right? Angle number 1, so we have a coalition on plastic waste, ending plastic waste. Component number 1 that we're looking at is designing packaging of plastic that enables it to be much more circular. So for example, if you have black trays on the bottom of your meat when you go to a supermarket, that pigment makes the economics of recycling and reusing that black tray much more difficult. So therefore, if you move things to more translucent materials, it just improves the economics. So we have this golden design rules. We have about 9 golden design rules. So you design plastic in a certain way. If you get many companies to adopt this plastic designed in a certain way, then it improves the overall circularity of it. So we're doing that. So that's one component. We've got the design rules done now, and now it's important to try to start to implement. So we're in the process of getting that implemented. So hopefully soon that will become implemented in our members, and therefore you'll be able to see some of this take place. So that's one thing we're looking at. The other thing we're looking at is a thing called EPR, extended producer responsibility. There is an ecosystem in the world for anybody who produces plastic, uses plastic, etc., which is the whole extended producer responsibility kind of lens, and it's important to design a system whereby all the various stakeholders have a say, and also the economics, it has to be worked out in a way that makes it all kind of equitable and sensible for everybody. So essentially we're advocating that, and so we're moving in a couple of countries where we're essentially showing people this is what we think an extended producer responsibility framework should look like, so you should think about implementing it in your country. So we're helping the regulators to understand, you know, from our point of view, what it takes to regulate in some way in the industry. And then the third thing that we're doing is to look at chemical recycling, because all the other recycling that we talked about is really mechanical recycling. So you kind of strip it up. I used to be a polymer scientist, actually, believe it or not. 35 years ago, my PhD was in polymers. Not that I remember much from it, but nevertheless, I remember enough. And most of this recycling that's being done today is mechanical, where you shred things or melt things. In the future, you could think about chemical recycling, which is where you break down the actual constituent materials into its monomeric forms, or in the pre-polymeric phase. And so we're looking at that, and you know, but then there's a whole series of, you know, then the question becomes, what's more efficient? Is it better to try to recycle it in a chemical way or not? And so we're working through some of that, and what we're basically saying is that the initial findings is actually very, very promising, chemical recycling. So that might be a new way of pushing this forward. So we're doing these three things, but I think the plastic issue is a case of both volunteerism and also regulation. But obviously regulation has to take into account a broader context of the whole ecosystem, so that all the various players have a you know, some kind of economic benefit out of it. Otherwise, you know, it's going to be very, very difficult to make the whole thing work.
I understand that, and that's why it's so difficult. And which gets us to the last question, which is, you have written that science has never been clearer. So what next going forward?
Yeah, I mean, well, being a scientist, I happen to when you're not a scientist, you always think that science is black and white, right? It's either this or that. And to be honest with you, there is lots of foundational science which is very black and white. And then there are things which are related to climate, which to me are emerging sciences, right? But then, you know, we've been working on these things for quite a few years now, well, you know, 20, 30 years now, where I think some of that science has become almost foundational in nature now, where it's absolutely crystal clear that it's this way and not that way. And so where something becomes foundational in the sense that it's absolutely crystal clear the direction, then people should start to act in that direction. There are new things that you never know, and therefore it takes time to make sure that the science becomes black or white, right? Because, you know, if you read any paper, a scientific paper, which is peer reviewed, you might get a lot of people agreeing with it, a lot of people disagreeing with it. So it's not entirely black and white on some areas, yeah. But there are certain parts of what we've done, or not we, but as the world has done over the past 20, 30 years, where the science is crystal clear, and where the science is black and white, we shouldn't wait anymore, we should act on it. Where the science is a bit gray, you might need to, you know, make some pilots to see which way things might work. But where it becomes black and white, that's what I mean. Where it's black and white science, act on it and do something. Otherwise, you know, we're wasting time. And to me, you know, we've spent the last, when did the Industrial Revolution start? The Industrial Revolution probably started, I guess, when we started burning hydrocarbons in a significant way, which I assume is the end of the 1800s, yeah, roughly. So we've been burning fossil fuels for 120, 30 years, or whatever it is. And so now we're reaping the, well, we see the problems of that. And so where the science has become crystal clear, we need to start acting. And I believe that now, I think this decade is the decade for action. And I don't know when this particular interview will air, but it's pretty close to COP26 in Glasgow, yeah?
Yes,
which as we speak is just a week and a bit away, actually, although I won't turn up for all of it, but I'll turn up for part of it, so it's about a week away. and it's a good occasion to basically start to act where things are absolutely crystal clear and start to work on these now. This is a decade of action, and I know lots of people have said that, but I genuinely believe that. I've worked in Asia for a long time, mostly China, and things in China happen quickly. You act very, very quickly, and I think this is what the world needs to do now when it comes to areas where the science is crystal clear. Just act and get started.
That's a good message to end the interview. It's time to act, and we must act quickly. Thank you so much for joining us and explaining to us about the forum. I think so the viewers of this program will really want to know about it, and they'll be learned after this whole show. Thank you so much for all the good work you're doing, and hope to see you sometime in one of the forums somewhere. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.